Nathaniel Hawthorne had everything a man could desire: wealth, power, and an empire that stretched across continents. As the CEO of Hawthorne Enterprises, his name carried weight in every boardroom, his influence shaping industries from technology to real estate. His life was the kind that most men could only dream of, a life of luxury where no desire went unfulfilled. Yet, despite having everything, doubt gnawed at him. It was a question that refused to leave his mind, a whisper that had turned into an obsession. Did his wife truly love him? Or did she only love his wealth? Nathaniel had married Evelyn Carter 5 years ago. She was breathtaking tall, poised, and elegant, with a sharp intellect that matched her beauty. Their relationship had begun like a whirlwind romance, from a movie-lavish dates, passionate nights, and a connection that had felt undeniable. But over time, as he observed the world around him, something began to unsettle him. He had seen it happen to men just like him, powerful, successful billionaires who had given their hearts to women they believed loved them. And then, the moment something went wrong, the moment they lost control, lost power, lost money, those same women disappeared, leaving them broken and alone. Nathaniel wasn't a fool. He knew the world could be cruel. He knew that love was often conditional, especially when wealth was involved. But Evelyn was different, wasn't she? She had never given him a reason to doubt her. She had never demanded anything from him, no extravagant displays of affection, no desperate need to flaunt their wealth. And yet, the nagging thought refused to leave him. Was she truly in love with him, Nathaniel, the man? Or was she in love with Nathaniel, the billionaire? The thought tormented him more than he cared to admit. His entire life, he had been a man who controlled everything: his business, his investments, even his public image. But love was unpredictable. And the idea that he could be deceived, that he could be made into a fool like so many others, was unbearable. So he devised a test so drastic, so extreme, that it would strip away all the illusions and reveal the truth. Nathaniel would fake a crippling disability. He would stage a tragic accident, one that would leave him paralyzed from the waist down. He would become a man who could no longer take Evelyn on extravagant vacations, no longer shower her with gifts, no longer provide the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. He would become a burden. And then he would wait. If Evelyn stayed, if she continued to love and support him despite his supposed disability, then he would know her love was real. But if she left, then he would have his answer. Nathaniel was meticulous in his planning. He hired the best medical professionals, actors, really, who would confirm his diagnosis. He ensured that his company, his estate, and even his closest friends would believe the lie. There could be no cracks in the story. It had to be flawless. And so the accident was staged. Late one evening, after finishing a supposed business meeting, Nathaniel had his car deliberately crashed into a guardrail. His team had orchestrated everything: the wreckage, the emergency response, even the hospital admission. It was all part of his elaborate deception. When he awoke in a private hospital suite, Evelyn was there, her face pale with worry. "Nathan," she whispered, clutching his hand. "Oh my God, I thought I lost you." Her voice shook with emotion, her eyes glistening with tears, real tears. For a brief moment, guilt flickered inside him. What if she truly did love him? What if he was about to put his wife through unimaginable pain for no reason? But the doubt was stronger. He had come too far to back out now. So he played his part. The doctors delivered the devastating news: Nathaniel Hawthorne, billionaire, businessman, a man who had always been in control, was now paralyzed from the waist down. He would never walk again. He would require constant care. His life, as he had known it, was over. The room had been silent, suffocating. And then Evelyn had broken down. She cried, burying her face in her hands. And for a moment, Nathaniel felt something inside him crack. She looked devastated, completely and utterly heartbroken. Was this real? Or was she mourning something else, the loss of her luxurious lifestyle? Only time would tell. The following weeks were the true test. Nathaniel moved back to their mansion, where everything had to be adapted for his new condition. His movements were slow, his body heavy in the wheelchair. He had to rely on others for even the most basic tasks. At first, Evelyn was devoted. She stayed by his side, helping him adjust. She held his hand during therapy sessions, kissed his forehead before bed, and whispered that they would get through this together. And for a fleeting moment, Nathaniel wanted to believe her. But then, small things started to change. He noticed how tired she looked, how distant. She still smiled, still acted as if she was fine. But there was something in her eyes, a sadness, a hesitation. One night, as she tucked him into bed, he caught her staring at him, her expression unreadable. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "are you okay?" She blinked, as if snapped out of a trance. Then she smiled a soft, forced smile. "Of course," she said. I just wish this hadn't happened to you." It was a simple statement, a normal thing for a wife to say. But something about it felt off. It wasn't pity in her voice. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something Nathaniel couldn't quite name. And in that moment, he realized the real test had only just begun. Nathaniel had always been a man of sharp instincts. His ability to read people, to anticipate their next move, had been the foundation of his success. It was how he built his empire, how he negotiated billion-dollar deals, how he stayed ahead of the competition. And yet, as he sat in his wheelchair, trapped in the lie of his own making, he couldn't read Evelyn. She was caring, too caring. She tended to him every morning, adjusting his pillows, helping him with his shirt, making sure his wheelchair was positioned perfectly. She kissed his forehead, whispered, "I love you," before bed, and never once complained. It was exactly how a loving wife should act. And that was what troubled him. Was it real? Or was she simply playing a role, waiting for the right moment to walk away? Nathaniel had expected the truth to reveal itself quickly. He had believed that if Evelyn was only with him for his wealth, she would start showing signs of frustration, impatience, resentment, distance. But weeks passed, and she remained devoted. Too devoted. One evening, as she carefully cut his steak into small pieces, Nathaniel studied her. "You don't have to do all this," he said, his voice neutral. Evelyn looked up, surprised. "Do what?" He gestured toward the plate in front of him. "Cutting my food, tucking me in every night, staying by my side constantly." Her expression softened. "You're my husband, Nathan. Who else would do it?" That should have reassured him. It didn't. Because deep down, he didn't believe her. Not yet. Nathaniel decided to push further. He began making small demands. Nothing too obvious, just small inconveniences. Little things that tested her patience. He would call for her late at night, pretending to need help adjusting his blankets. He would ask her to bring him things from another room, only to change his mind at the last second. And every time, Evelyn complied without hesitation. But one night, something changed. Nathaniel was sitting in his study, staring at the city skyline through the large glass windows. The lights stretched endlessly, a reminder of the world he used to command so effortlessly. Evelyn entered with a tray of tea, just as she always did. "Nathan, you should get some rest," she said softly, placing the cup beside him. "You've been sitting here for hours." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for the cup and deliberately let it slip from his hands. The porcelain shattered on the floor, tea splashing across the hardwood. Evelyn froze. Nathaniel watched her carefully, waiting for a flicker of irritation, of frustration, anything that would expose her true feelings. But instead, she let out a tired sigh and crouched down, gathering the broken pieces with delicate fingers. "I'll get another one," she murmured. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "Aren't you annoyed?" She glanced up at him. "Why would I be?" "Because I keep making your life harder," he said bluntly. "I'm not the man you married anymore. I can't take care of you. I can't. He let his voice trail off, feigning helplessness. Evelyn stood, brushing her hands on a napkin. Is that what you think? Nathaniel held her gaze. Isn't it true? Her lips pressed together, and for the first time, he saw something in her expression a flicker, of something deep, unreadable. Then, softly, she said, You don't understand, do you? Nathaniel's pulse quickened. Understand what? Evelyn took a slow breath. You think I love you because of the things you give me, the lifestyle, the security, the power. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. But what you don't realize, Nathan, is that none of that mattered to me. I loved you. The man, the flawed, stubborn, brilliant man. Nathaniel swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. She smiled a sad, knowing smile. You thought this accident would change that? Silence hung between them. For the first time since he had started this charade, Nathaniel felt uneasy. Because something in Evelyn's voice, something in her eyes, told him that she knew more than she was letting on. And that meant one thing. His test was not going the way he had expected.
Nathaniel had always believed himself to be the smartest man in the room. It was how he had built his empire be outthinking, outmaneuvering, and outlasting everyone around him. But now, sitting in his wheelchair with Evelyn standing over him, he wasn't so sure anymore. Her words still echoed in his mind. You thought this accident would change that? What had she meant by that? Had she simply been speaking from the heart? Or did she know? The idea sent a chill through him. He had been careful, so careful. Every detail of his plan had been executed flawlessly. The doctors, the medical records, the staged accident, everything had been meticulously arranged. There was no way she could suspect the truth. And yet, for the first time since this entire deception began, Nathaniel felt like he was the one being tested. That night, as he lay in bed, he found himself unable to sleep. He could hear Evelyn moving around their bedroom light footsteps, the rustling of fabric, the occasional sigh. She had been distant since their conversation earlier, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Just when he thought she had finally gone to bed, he heard the faint sound of a zipper. His eyes snapped open. Through the dim light, he saw her standing by the closet, carefully packing a small suitcase. His stomach clenched. Was she leaving? He forced himself to stay calm, keeping his voice level. Going somewhere? Evelyn flinched, clearly startled. She turned, her expression unreadable. It's just for the weekend, she said casually. My mother's not feeling well. I thought I'd visit her. Nathaniel studied her, searching for any sign of deception. Evelyn loved her mother, but she rarely visited for long periods. Why now? Had she finally reached her limit? Had she decided that taking care of a paralyzed husband was more than she had bargained for? The thought twisted inside him like a knife. He forced a nod. Of course. Let me know if she needs anything. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, so brief that anyone else might have missed it. But Nathaniel didn't miss things. She wasn't telling him everything. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea what was coming next. The weekend passed in agonizing slowness. Evelyn texted him once in the morning and once before bed. Simple, polite messages. Nothing emotional. Nothing that indicated she missed him. Nathaniel tried to ignore the growing anxiety in his chest. It was ridiculous. This was his test, his game. And yet, for some reason, he felt like the one being left behind. By Sunday night, he had convinced himself she wasn't coming back. And then, just past midnight, the front door opened. Nathaniel turned his wheelchair toward the hallway, just as Evelyn stepped inside, looking exhausted but calm. You're back, he said, keeping his tone neutral. She dropped her bag by the door, her expression unreadable. Of course I'm back. Something in the way she said it made his pulse quicken. He wanted to ask her what she meant. Instead, he watched as she walked over, leaned down, and gently kissed his forehead. Then she whispered, "Good night, Nathan?" And just like that, she disappeared into their bedroom. leaving him alone with the one thought he could no longer ignore. Had she seen through his lie?
Nathaniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dim light of his study, staring at the city skyline, his mind racing. Evelyn's return should have reassured him. If she were planning to leave, she would have done so this weekend. Instead, she had come back, kissed him goodnight, and acted as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. Nathaniel could feel it. Her voice, the way she looked at him, the quiet understanding in her eyes. It was too calm, too knowing, and that terrified him. For the first time since he orchestrated this elaborate test, Nathaniel felt like he had lost control. The next morning, Evelyn moved around the house as if everything were normal. She made breakfast, answered emails, and even sat beside him during his scheduled home therapy session. Nathaniel observed her carefully, waiting for some crack in the illusion. Nothing. If she was angry, she didn't show it. If she suspected something, she didn't say it. By the afternoon, his patience had worn thin. As she set a cup of coffee in front of him, he finally spoke. "Did you enjoy your trip?" Evelyn glanced at him, arching an eyebrow. "Yes, it was nice seeing my mother." "Did she ask about me?" She hesitated for the briefest moment before answering, "She did." Nathaniel leaned forward. "And what did you tell her?" Evelyn sighed, stirring her tea. "I told her the truth, Nathan." A cold chill ran down his spine. "And what exactly is the truth?" Evelyn set her spoon down, meeting his gaze. "That my husband is recovering, that things are difficult, but we're managing." Nathaniel didn't blink. "And is that really what you believe?" She tilted her head slightly. "Should I believe something else?" There it was again, that knowing look. The way she held his gaze, unflinching, like she was waiting for him to confess something. Nathaniel felt his pulse quicken. She knew. She had to know. But how? He had covered every detail. The medical records, the doctors, the staged accident. There was no way for her to have figured it out. Unless, had she known from the beginning? The thought sent a wave of unease through him. Nathaniel had always prided himself on being in control, on being the one pulling the strings. But what if he wasn't? What if, all along, Evelyn had been the one playing him? That night, he watched her closely. Evelyn moved through the house effortlessly, as if nothing had changed, as if she wasn't living with a husband who had supposedly lost the ability to walk. She helped him into bed, kissed his forehead, whispered, "Good night, Nathan." And then, just as she was about to turn off the light, Nathaniel spoke. "Do you ever regret marrying me?" Evelyn froze for a moment before turning back to face him. The faintest smile touched her lips. "Why would you ask that?" Nathaniel shrugged. "Because I'm not the man I used to be." Evelyn studied him for a long moment, then sat down on the edge of the bed. "Nathan, do you really think I'm the kind of woman who would leave just because things got difficult?" Her voice was soft, but there was something sharp beneath the tenderness, something that sent a jolt of unease through him. He didn't respond. He didn't know how to. Evelyn reached out, brushing a hand through his hair. "I married you because I love you, not your money, not your power, you." Nathaniel wanted to believe her, but he had tested that love. And now, for the first time, he feared that the test was turning against him. Because if Evelyn knew the truth, if she had known all along, then what was she waiting for? What game was she playing? And more importantly, who would win? Nathaniel had never been afraid of losing. He had built his empire from the ground up, fought ruthless competitors, and crushed anyone who stood in his way. Losing was never an option. But as he sat in his wheelchair, watching Evelyn move through their home with an air of quiet confidence, he felt something dangerously close to fear. He had set this test to reveal her true nature, to see if she would stay, to prove to himself that she loved him or expose her if she didn't. But now, for the first time, he didn't know who was testing whom. The next morning, Evelyn prepared breakfast as usual. Nathaniel wheeled himself to the dining table, his eyes locked on her. She looked at peace, as if nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't spent weeks caring for a man who could no longer walk, as if she wasn't trapped in a marriage where everything had changed overnight. Nathaniel needed to break the silence. "You're handling all of this well," he said. Evelyn poured herself a cup of tea, not looking up. "All of what?" "My accident, my condition, the fact that our entire life has been turned upside down." Evelyn finally met his gaze. There was something unreadable in her eyes, something calm, yet knowing. "I've had time to adjust," she said simply. Nathaniel's grip tightened on his fork. Adjust? Was that it? Was she simply accepting her fate? Or was she waiting for something? "You never once doubted staying?" he pressed. Evelyn took a slow sip of her tea. "Should I have?" The way she said it, the way she watched him, made Nathaniel's chest tighten. She knew. He didn't know how. He didn't know when she had figured it out. But she knew. And yet she hadn't confronted him. Why? What was she waiting for? That night, Nathaniel lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His carefully constructed world was collapsing. This was supposed to be his test, his game, but now the rules were no longer clear. Evelyn was too calm, too accepting. He had expected frustration, tears, anger. Instead, she was watching him, studying him. And that terrified him more than if she had simply walked away. Nathaniel needed to regain control. He needed to force her hand. The next morning, he made a decision. He called for Evelyn as she was in the kitchen. When she entered the bedroom, he took a deep breath and said, "I think we need to talk." Evelyn tilted her head. "About what?" Nathaniel steeled himself. "About us, about our future, about the fact that I don't expect you to stay." For the first time, her mask slipped. For just a second, a fraction of a second, he saw it. A flicker of something deep in her eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Evelyn folded her arms, staring at him. "You think I'm going to leave you?" Nathaniel forced a bitter laugh. "Can you blame me? I'm not the same man anymore. I can't give you the life you deserve." Evelyn stepped closer. Too close. And then she did something he never expected. She leaned down and whispered in his ear, "Are you sure about that?" Nathaniel froze. His blood ran cold. And in that moment, he knew. She knew everything, and she was just waiting for him to break.
Nathaniel had faced boardrooms full of cutthroat executives. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with the world's most ruthless businessmen. He had built his empire with sheer willpower and unshakable confidence. But as Evelyn whispered those 4 words in his ear, "Are you sure about that?" for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. She knew. She had always known. And she had been waiting, watching, testing him. The realization sent a shockwave through him. How? How had she figured it out? He had been meticulous, covering every detail of his fake disability. There was no way she could have known. Unless she had never believed it to begin with. Nathaniel swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep his expression neutral. "Evelyn," he said slowly, carefully, "what do you mean by that?" Evelyn straightened, crossing her arms. For the first time in weeks, she looked like the one in control. "I mean," she said calmly, "that you're a terrible liar, Nathan." Nathaniel's heartbeat thundered in his ears. His mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." Evelyn let out a soft, almost pitying laugh. "Oh, please, do you really think I wouldn't notice?" She walked over to the dresser, picked up a small hairpin, and twirled it between her fingers. "At first, I thought maybe it was the shock that made you act strangely, but then I started noticing patterns." She turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "You never once called for a doctor when you were in pain. You never needed any of your medications. You didn't even flinch when I moved your legs by accident." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. Evelyn took a step closer, her voice soft but deadly. "You played your part well, I'll admit," she said. "You pretended to struggle. You made me think you needed me, but you underestimated me, Nathan. Nathaniel forced a breath through his nose. He had lost control. The very thing he had feared had come true. She had turned the test on him. Evelyn crouched down so they were at eye level. "And do you know what the most interesting part is?" she whispered. Nathaniel didn't answer. He couldn't. Evelyn leaned in just a little closer. "I wanted to see how long you'd keep up the act." Nathaniel's stomach dropped. Evelyn smiled, but it wasn't the soft, loving smile he had always known. It was knowing, amused. She had been one step ahead of him all along. And then she stood up and did something that made his blood freeze. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Nathaniel's eyes locked onto it. "Evelyn," she tapped the screen casually. "I recorded everything, Nathan." His breath hitched. "What?" She held up the phone, her expression unreadable. "Every conversation, every moment of doubt, every test you threw my way. I recorded it all." Nathaniel's entire world shifted beneath him. Evelyn had proof. And suddenly, he was no longer the billionaire with all the power. He was a man trapped in his own game. Evelyn tilted her head. "So, tell me, Nathan, what happens now?" Silence. A heavy, unbearable silence. Nathaniel had no answer. Because for the first time in his life, he had lost.